Please note that the following disclaimer is from my guest, Stephanie Mccullough.
I need to let you know that I offer investment advice through Private Advisor Group, which is a federally registered investment advisor. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations to any individual. That means you. To determine which strategies or investments might be suitable for you, please consult the appropriate qualified professional before you make any decisions.
Hey, it's your financial maven, Samantha Mittman-Besnoff, CPA, and after almost 25 years in the accounting world, I've decided to share my insights and passion about money. Knowing your money and hopefully feeling less stress about your money is what I call being financially empowered. Welcome to the Your Financial Maven podcast.
So today I have with me Stephanie Mccullough, who is a financial planner. She's also a speaker and a podcaster in her own right. She works with women, helping them through a non-judgmental financial advisory way to get to understand their personal finances, making sure we don't carry shame around with our money. And interestingly enough, and I'm sure, Stephanie, that you're aware of, we talk about you don't want to carry shame, but for women, it comes with a lot of baggage and history. And in fact, in October, it will be 50 years since law was passed in October of 1974, giving women the right to have their own credit card without having their father or their husband sign off on it. So this is huge. And I can see where shame comes into play. We know that it is unwarranted, but we have to help others with that. You also state that there's emotion with money, and we have to have those conversations about it, which is absolutely true. We need to do more of those conversations so that we can learn. So Stephanie, I'm so excited to have you here. So welcome to Your Financial Maven.
Thanks, Samantha. I'm excited.
Yes. So I'm going to start off with my question I ask all my guests. What is money?
Money is just a tool to get the things that we need and want now and in the future. And at the same time, it's completely fraught.
Yes, it is. It is. It's very interesting that you bring that up because I want to know your story of getting into being a financial planner and then also the focus to helping women get through these emotions when it comes to money, the shame, and kind of coming out the other side to be financially empowered. So tell me a little bit more about your story.
So I grew up with a father who was a financial advisor, and I never wanted to do what he did. It just didn't appeal to me at all. And then, I went off to college, I went to grad school, I got a, job in the real world. And then my husband and I decided, oh, you know what? Maybe we want to have kids at some point. And if we do that, maybe we want to move back to the Philadelphia area where we both grew up. Because there were grandparents, handy dandy babysitters.
Yep. My parents, well, they live in Florida now and spend the summer up at the Jersey Shore. But yes, when my kids were younger, they were still in the Philly area. So it was nice.
Right?
Yeah.
So valuable.
So valuable.
So we started thinking about it, and my husband got a job offer in Philly. And we're like, oh, I guess this is meant to be. And then I was like, well, what the heck am I going to do? I was doing like international trade stuff. There wasn't much of it in Philly. So I thought maybe I could go work with my dad. And I made this whole pitch to him. And it was completely unnecessary because he was like, you had me at hello. One of my kids is interested in the business. Like, woohoo.
I have to tell you, my father's been in the life insurance business for over 50 years. And when I told him that, yes, I will get my independent life insurance agency license, I do have it for Pennsylvania and New Jersey. He's been thrilled. I love being able to have that connection with him.
That's nice. So cool. That's nice. Yeah. My dad started as a life insurance guy too, when he was still in college. So many years. But I really had a crisis when I first joined because my dad's a natural born salesperson and I am not. That gene skipped me and went to my little brother. And he's got a fancy MBA from a big school in Philadelphia. And I do not. So I thought, oh, I can't do this work because I'm not like him. So fortunately for us, I didn't have one of those on-ramps where I had to sell stuff from day one. He had a lot of corporate clients. He did retirement plans. He did like executive benefit programs, all this stuff. So there were plenty of opportunities for me to go in and do the group meetings, informational meetings, and meet one-on-one and enroll the people and help them fill out the forms. So I could have meaningful money conversations with people and not be in a sales role.
Which is important, right? Having that meaningful money conversation, so important.
Yeah. And I would have lasted about an hour and a half if it was a sales situation. But at the same time, I was like, oh, shoot, I don't see a future for myself because I'm not like my father. And This was like 1997. I went to a Chamber of Commerce event and I sat next to a guy who called himself a coach. I was like, what? A coach? Like you coach volleyball? I don't understand.
Right.
And he's like, just do a free session and you'll understand what I do. So I signed up for my free session. And by the end, I'm like in tears, like, I have to work with you. Help me. Because family business is a life sentence, right? You're stuck. That's what I felt. And I couldn't do the work.
Yeah, it can be because you have that, okay, kind of, oh, I'm in the business, but now I've got that obligation to my family of like wanting to keep this going.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt, like super stuck. So luckily, I worked with this coach and kind of came around to, oh, there's a lot of parts about this I really enjoy. Having the meaningful conversations, creating a safe space to talk about money, because a lot of people don't really have a space to talk about money, helping them understand something that's super confusing that no one teaches us, at least not our generations. We weren't taught about money.
Right. We learned by watching, but not understanding.
Yeah. Or stumbling around and making our own mistakes, and seeking out our own information sources.
Very true. Very true.
Right?
Yeah.
So I kind of came around to, I like the components of it. And we had a hospital in somewhere between you and me that you have heard the name of, where we did the retirement plan.
Okay.
And I was there like all the time, meeting with people around the clock, all the different shifts. And a lot of the employees at a hospital are women.
Yeah,
Not
they are.
necessarily the C-suite at the time. There were certainly physicians, there were nurses, there were technicians, there were lots of folks in support roles. And I just found so many women who either outsourced the whole investment or long-term financial conversation to a man, or were sadly very poorly treated by people in my profession, or just ignored the whole thing and, did the head in the sand thing. So I kept in the back of my mind was like, there's got to be a better way to have a conversation with women about money. And then the hospital fired me.
Oh, no.
In the middle of our annual review one time. They're like, you know what? We're not going to use a local advisor anymore. We're going to go with Vanguard. I'm like, oh, were you going to let me know before
Right.
the meeting? But whatever. So I was like, oh, now I have time and I need the finances to do this thing I've been thinking about. So then I started my own little brand within a brand of my father's company, working with women specifically.
I think that's great. And I think you're right. I think it is. And I'm not saying that men don't hit these issues as well. But I think for women, to a degree, there could be more of a barrier. There could be that understanding. I mean, I listen to different podcasts. I read different books, in the business world, whatever. And I've come across several times, especially with the investing piece for women. And some men do this too. I know we've had conversations with our boys about this as well. I'm going to create myself my Roth IRA, or I'm going to put money into investing. And they put it into the cash bucket and they never pick their stocks, especially with retirement. You have to pick the investment funds. And I've heard horror stories, especially where women will just put it in there, not realizing because they weren't advised properly, they didn't have the knowledge, that now you have to pick your funds so that your retirement grows. And after 30 years, if it doesn't grow, then, and paying attention to it, right? And I get it. People are like, oh, I just throw it in there and I ignore it. It'll do its thing. Well, no, you have to pay attention.
Yeah. And when I was working on this retirement plan, this was before the law changed and the default investment option was the money market. I just met with a friend of mine who's a journalist in finances yesterday. And she said the Gen X generation was that generation where the default was the money market. And then the younger generations, they changed the rule. And the default is what they call a target date retirement fund, which is, got a well-diversified mix of assets, and it changes as you get closer to retirement. So you can fix it and forget it. But they didn't really have that for a long time.
And it's interesting because my husband, his job, he's had a 401k. He's been at his place of employment almost 30 years. His company did the, put it in our stock and we'll match it. But he also diversified because he didn't want to be tied completely to that business. Well, that company went bankrupt in early 2000. Yes, we lost some retirement. It happened. But he was lucky because he still had some diversification. So while his retirement took a hit, he had coworkers, their retirements really took a hit because, again, putting it in that money market, investing it in one particular stock, not having that knowledge, that's what you learn. That's what you understand without questioning it. I think that's the biggest thing is questioning.
Yes.
And even if you don't know the questions, I always say no question is ever stupid. So you shouldn't start with saying, I have a stupid question. It should always just be, I have a question when it comes to money. Because you never know. And it's interesting, I was doing a little bit of research for our podcast, and I came across, you talk about the human side of money, there's the emotional side, but about the science of the money. And I want to kind of know, like, what does the science say when it comes to us understanding our money?
Oh my gosh, there's a whole field. There have been 2 Nobel Prizes in economics that were awarded to psychologists.
Interesting.
Not economists.
Okay.
So it's the whole field of behavioral finance that says that, like you traditional economists, you think money is completely rational and human beings just weigh the pros and cons of all their decisions.
Right.
And the psychologists are like, have you met people? Like, we're not rational about anything.
Right.
Why
There's
would we
always
be
emotion.
rational about money?
Yeah.
So the fascinating thing is that the behavioral finance people, like there's names like Dan Ariely and Daniel Kahneman. There's a lot of books on this and resources. I love the book title by Dan Ariely. It's called Predictably Irrational. So it's not just that humans are irrational about money. We're actually irrational in predictable ways. Common shortcuts that the human brain takes when faced with complex decisions fraught with lots of uncertainty. All money decisions have lots of uncertainty. So we take these shortcuts like recency bias, which is one, where we think what has happened in the recent past is likely to continue. That's not really true.
Right. You have to look across the history of things, and things are changing. We grew up before or as computers were really coming of age. So the Gen X, straddles the whole, everything's done by hand and paper, and now it's all done by computer, and there's digital things and digital money, and it's more easily at your fingertips than where we would have to, like my grandmother would call the bank. No kidding. She lived with us for 43 years. She moved in when I was 6 months old, very attuned to her money. So if she would write like a birthday check for us, if you didn't deposit that check within a few days, she was on you because she would call the bank. I'm not kidding. The bank had a service where you could call every day. I think you can still do it and check your balances. But she would do it almost every day. And we now have that digitally. We can open up our phone, go to our bank account and take a look at that. And I think there's emotion in that too, right? It's tied to that. But it's interesting. I chatted with my son, my older son who just graduated college. He was a swimmer through college. And so I had a conversation with some of his swim teammates about money. And it was so interesting. They feel that like the digital form is great, but they have a harder time keeping track of things because it's more instantaneous.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't even realize you've spent money, right? You can flash your Apple Watch at something and you've spent money.
Right. You don't go back and you don't go and reconcile it, things like that.
No.
But yeah, I do think that the science of money and that understanding is interesting because it's something that I, in my whole research of doing this podcast, trying to come across to talk to financial therapists. There are financial therapists out there. And it is a thing, and I actually do have another podcast interview coming up in the fall talking to somebody who's in that field because behavior does tie into how you spend your money. This, like you said, the recency of like what's been going on recently. Yes, the economy has shifted, has changed over the last 4 or 5 years, but I think people tend to forget that the economy always does change. There might be periods of 5, maybe 10 years where there's some stability, but things change. People in our generation, look, crash of 2008, right? The housing market, the stock market, like these things happen and it's an ebb and flow. And I think we've become more of an international community when it comes to our finances. So with that understanding, like how do you help women take those steps to kind of feel more in control of their money?
I always start with kind of where you started. What is money? I'm like, money's just a tool. I can't help anybody figure out what to do with it until we know what it's for that person. Like, what do you want your money to do for you today, in the future? What are the things? Which gets back to what's important to you in life. What are your values? Tell me about your people. What kind of life are you trying to create for yourself, for your family?
And do you delve into their money story? Kind of how did they learn money as growing up? Because there can be trauma with money. There can be different things if you grew up a certain way and you don't want to ever be that certain way. It all depends on your economics of how you grew up and stuff like that.
Yes, we always dive into that. How was money handled in your family growing up? What did you see like between your parents, or like what were the emotions? What were your experiences? What were your memories? And I've talked to multiple people where maybe they took one message away from their upbringing. There wasn't much money, so I am a super saver and I'm scared to spend and I'm a hoarder. However, my sibling grew up in the same house, maybe a year younger than me. There wasn't much money, so every time money hits them, they spend it because it might not be there tomorrow. So you can't always predict what the lessons are going to be, but we all have head trash. We've all got,
Oh, I like that head trash.
Head trash. I stole that from someone. Accumulated emotional baggage around money. And I'm not a therapist. There are therapists that focus on money. And at the same time, I think it's important to at least try to bring some of these things to light, because otherwise we're operating on autopilot and we maybe get anxious every time our credit card statement arrives in the mail or the email or however it does. But we don't take the time to look back and see what that was. Like, oh, my parents fought every month, when the bills came in and I got that sick to my stomach feeling and I hid in the attic. I don't know. Like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, but look, I've got a good place now. I don't have to feel that. But a lot of that programming comes in early.
Yeah. And probably where the shame comes in too, to a degree. I mean, I think for women, there's an extra level because we weren't given the rights to be able to own our own home and credit cards, have our own bank accounts until, 50 years ago, even, later than that, because women were more in the workforce and those things had to come into play in order for us to have those financial freedoms. What are some of the other ways that you help to tackle that money shame when you're talking to your clients?
I find that sharing both the hey, no one taught us this stuff, and look how well you've done so far, like you've gotten here, and our brains are wired to make mistakes. And then people kind of go oh, really? It's not just me? I'm not a horrible person. It's not a character flaw that I tend to overspend every time I go to Target.
Right. Well, no. I think everybody tends to overspend when they go to Target.
That's why I picked that one.
Right. I mean, I don't know what it is about that store.
They know all the psychology. They've got people to figure that out.
Actually, I have to say, there have been a few and far between times where I've walked out with just what I've needed. And I'm
done.
I walk out, I'm like, yes. I beat the system this time around. So
you want to tell everybody, look, I only bought the shampoo.
But it's true. How do you tackle all that and have grace, right? I talk about grace when it comes to understanding your money and spending your money. And like you said, it's okay. I don't know if I necessarily would say mistakes. It's just more of that plan of, okay, I spent money on this, that opportunity cost of spending on something and giving it up for something else. And, it might not have been a mistake at that time. But as you're planning and thinking about your money, you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
But here's the other thing, the other piece about shame. And Brene Brown says, shame thrives in the dark. And if we're not allowed to talk about money, because it's the last taboo, then we don't know that all our friends are feeling the same anxiety about money. And maybe different flavors of it, but they are also beating themselves up for not starting earlier or saving for retirement. And they also can't believe how many times their kids outgrow their shoes and, oh, do I really have to buy the name brand? Whatever it is, we don't feel comfortable sharing that. And that is a big piece of shame. So literally, I've had women come to me as financial planning clients and they say, I must be the worst person you've ever seen. I'm like, no, not even close. Not at all. But I think, we kind of fester, we spin around in our own heads because we can't share it with anyone. We don't feel comfortable. So I always advise, if you can, find yourself a money buddy, someone with whom you can be open, someone who's not going to judge you, will help you stay accountable.
Well, and that's the key too. I think as women in general, we need to stop judging each other. And, everybody's situation is different. And especially when it comes to money, there is that longing of, oh, this person has more money than me and look at everything that they can do with it. Well, you have no idea where they started. You do not know, are they putting themselves in further debt to get what they want? And that's something that, myself with those demons of, oh, I wish we had more of this or had that, but I'm blessed with what I have. And that my situation is far different than a lot of my friends. I mean, I was very lucky when I got out of college. I had no debt, which is very rare nowadays, but was even rare to a degree in that. My husband had no debt either. We were still dating at the time, and we were very lucky. Now, we put ourselves into debt within a year of graduating because we bought a house, we got cars, which was great. You're building equity, you're building your credit, you're building things to show that you can be financially responsible. But we made certain decisions, like we didn't tie ourselves to our house, so we weren't house poor, so we could do other things. And that shifted when I didn't work. When I had my kids, I didn't work as much. So again, financially, we became a little tighter because 2 incomes weren't coming into the house. And having to try not to feel shame in doing that we can't do what the Joneses are doing. They always say that kind of thing.
And I always say, too, don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. All you see of the neighbors is that they're spending the summer down the shore and they've got 2 fancy cars and their kids go to private school. You can't see their bank account or their retirement account or their debt. Like you have no idea. So I think we assume, and especially with social media, it's in our face all the time.
Hey, it's time for a money break. Welcome back from our money break. And along that lines with social media, I'm sure you've come across clients who say, oh, I heard this on TikTok or I saw this on Facebook. How do you combat some of the stuff that you see on social media is false or not factual enough? How do you combat that with your clients? What is it that you try to share with them to understand where they need to go to look for the right resources and things like that?
Honestly, I haven't seen it too much. I think because the type of clients I tend to attract are the ones who they're not following financial content. They're not going out and reading the personal finance books. They're the ones who they're stressed out about it. If they're looking to relax, they're going to read a mystery novel or something.
I'm sure though, and maybe not for you, but that idea of, oh, I saw this on TikTok and someone talking about this and we have to do it this way. And I'm like, well, what are the other implications of doing the budget this way or understanding your taxes? This tax season was very rough for me. And part of it was because I do try to promote stuff on social media and some of the falsehoods that were going across social media and people were believing it. And no, we had a tax law change in 2017 that is starting to sunset in 2025. Yeah. And your pay is definitely shifted and changed, and partly because of COVID and partly because of the tax law. That's where professionals, I think, come into play. So for yourself and for women, what are the tips in wanting to get someone who's a financial professional in your field to talk about that financial planning? What are the things you tell your clients they should be looking for in regards to that and how to tackle their money?
I mean, to me, in order to get good financial advice in any sphere, your sphere, my sphere, I think you're going to have to talk about all the things that touch on money and that are affected by money. So you want to feel comfortable, I always say, getting financially naked with that person. Do you feel like this person is going to scoff at you or make you feel bad about something? Or, if you already have a professional, do you kind of dread going into them? I had a coworker years ago and she hated going to her doctor because every time she went in, her doctor was going to tell her to lose weight. She was a perfectly normal weight. Right. I'm like, find a new doctor. You don't have to put up with that. So I think people don't really realize that you can ditch your financial advisor any day of the week. If you've met one financial advisor, you've met one. We all have different personalities and approaches and focuses, and what we call ourselves in our title tells you nothing about what we actually do.
I agree with you right there. I mean, as a CPA, I get the standard, XYZ, and I'm like, but have you had the conversation with me? I mean, that's why I always say, set up that interview. If they have a consultation, set up the consultation and have those questions, and what are the things that we should specifically be asking about when it comes to money that you are able to share?
I think you want to get clear on what do I want this professional to do for me? What am I hoping they can help me with? I'll meet people, I'll tell them I'm a financial planner. They're like, oh, someday when I'll have money to invest, I could work with you. I'm like, that's not what I do.
Work with me now, right.
I do investments, but that's just a piece of it. So are you looking for help on your investments? Are you looking for help on your budgeting? Are you trying to figure out if you're saving enough to retire in 5 years? What are the questions you're hoping this person can help you answer? And then go find someone who does that. Don't use your cousin. Don't use your next door neighbor's financial advisor. Talk to them. Find out what they actually do. What are the services? And you got to ask, how do you get paid? It's not rude. It feels really rude, especially we're talking about how, we don't like to talk about money. It's not rude in my world to ask how you get paid.
And it's not rude in my world either. You have to ask, what are your fees? How do you charge? How do we communicate? Is that part of the fee? And I know in my world, the accounting world, a lot is shifting on how we charge for services. So you have to understand that you might charge it one way, might just be 100% commission based off of investments that are done for you, or it's different. It's a monthly fee or however. And I think you need to find that out and find out what you're comfortable with. And you're right, it's not rude. You have to know, because if you don't ask the question, how much is this going to cost me, how you charge, then you're putting yourself backwards instead of moving forwards.
Here's the other problem. I think back to kind of what you just said about asking the question and women feeling shame. My motto is you don't have to know the answers. You have to know the questions to ask and have the guts to ask them. So figure out like, okay, what are the questions I need to ask? And don't just assume. I met a woman one time. I was doing a 5-session women's financial planning at a local community center. And during the break, a woman came up to me and she was 70 something. And she brought me this document and she said, what do you think of this? And it was, an investment product, financial product. And I said, oh, okay. What did your advisor tell you? Why did he think this was a good idea for you? And she said, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, because she didn't
never
ask.
Asked. Right. She just bought it. And it was a product that tied up her money for 10 years and she was 72.
And I think that's generational too. I think, probably. Again, there's some of that, like our parents, who are older than us, well, they should be, but yeah, you know what I mean? That their concept of the financial world far different than our concept. And then, of course, the younger generation, our younger adults. My older son, he's not 100% thrilled about living at home right now and having his job. And we've had to have the conversations that it's okay that you're home. You're starting out in your career. Get your feet firmly cemented. Let's have the conversation about a budget. Let's have a conversation about or spending plan, about your investments. We're having those conversations because we want him to understand that what we had when we got out of college and what we did was based off of what we learned from our parents. And I think it's trying to break that cycle that we don't have to follow what the prior generation did. And do you find that with your clients or when you talk to women of trying to help them come up with a financial plan that works for them, that might not work for the next person?
Yeah, very much. I mean, everything is custom and it's all based on your situation and what's important to you. And sometimes we have to kind of break down, like one woman had a very fancy car and I kind of prodded her on that. And she's like, I have 1 hour each way commute every day. I want to be comfortable and safe when I do it. I'm like, okay.
That's a great idea. Right.
And then she knew she had to spend less on other things, but that was her priority. That was her, care for herself on this stressful, faraway job. I'm like, okay. But we wanted to talk about it and make sure it was her value and not trying to keep up with the neighbors or look a certain way. So I think it's all about getting to know your values and then seeing, are my dollars actually in line with my values?
So do you sit down, besides having the conversation of trying to find out their money story, their history of leading up, or like this with the car, why is it that you spent money on a more expensive car than maybe you should have or whatever? Are there anything else that you do? Do you sit down and work through like a budget or spending plan to show them kind of where they're at and where they could be? Like, what are the things that women should really pay attention to when they're trying to understand their money?
Yeah. And I think, again, the first step is like, what's the feeling that comes up if you've been avoiding looking at your money?
Yeah, very true.
Like the numbers on the page are not judging you. They're just numbers.
Yeah.
So if you can give yourself grace, to use your phrase, and try to take off the judgmental hat and put on your like scientist hat, investigator hat. Like, I'm just going for information here because information is power. If you know where your dollars are going, then you can consciously decide like, oh, you know what? I'd rather redirect some of those over here. And it's totally in your control. Budgeting is control, but the fear and the shame comes up. Like, I spent how much at Wawa?
Absolutely. Or Starbucks or clothes shopping. You're right. But I think you're right. It is okay because then it says to you, oh, did I really have to spend that money going to a Starbucks or getting clothes or going to Wawa or wherever at work? Here in Lancaster, we have Sheetz. So I know we do have a Wawa.
Oh, yeah. Your Sheetz department. Okay. You're right in the border.
Right on the border. We do have a Wawa, or we have a couple Wawas now coming into Lancaster, which I find is really hysterical because, I was out in Pittsburgh and it was all Sheetz's and Philly area is all the Wawas. Yep. And then now you have the middle of the state.
It's a Pennsylvania thing, people.
It is yes, it is a Pennsylvania thing. And my heart's kind of torn between the two. But yeah, having that understanding. And I think it's important also for women who are with significant others, spouses, partners, whomever, you both have to have that conversation. I hear, oh, my husband handles all that. He pays all the bills. And you need to be a part of that conversation.
Yes, definitely. Because men have a habit of either dying or leaving before
there's that.
Pass away. I heard this stat. I can't swear to it, but I heard 80% of men die married and 80% of women die single. So at some point, chances are you're going to have to take the lead on the finances. So if you can start when you're not in a emotional upheaval and grief and crisis, you'll be much better off.
I think it's important, and there's a lot to it, and it's okay. And you have to have those conversations. And I guess not a prejudice saying, hey, I'm going to take over the bills. I want to know what you're doing because I need to be aware of where things are at. Maybe I do want to try to take over the billing. And it's reverse in our family. I handle it all. Yes, it's because I'm the accountant, but I still tell my husband, we still have those conversations. He has access to our accounting software that I use to track everything. And he's really good at paying attention because I want him, God forbid something happens to me first.
Right.
It goes both ways, I think, in a relationship.
But I think, and you need to be sensitive too, because maybe the spouse who has been taking control might feel on the defensive, like, do you think I'm doing something wrong? So it's much more of a collaborative conversation. There's a financial therapist named Barry Tesler, whom I adore, Bari. She has the book, The Art of Money. And she talks about having a money date and starting with questions like, hey, how was money handled in your family growing up? Like kind of getting at that emotional baggage as opposed to, show me the bills today. I want to know.
Yeah, which is so interesting because I just recently interviewed another financial planner, someone in the financial planning field, talking about loving your money and dating your money and understanding your money. And then I actually also just finished reading Financial Feminist by Tori Dunlap in the first 100K, which I think if you haven't paid attention to what she has to say, she has some amazing tips and understanding of money, but she also talks about having those dates, those financial money dates with your significant other or partner, spouse, whomever, you're sharing your finances with, so that you both have an understanding not only of kind of what bills get paid, when they get paid, and what's the cash flow, what's the money, but just in general, kind of, do we need to reassess where we're spending our money?
Right. Is this in line with what we both want? And I've seen couples, there's no right or wrong way when it comes to accounts. One couple we worked with, they each gave themselves a little allowance on the side. They had their own side accounts of a couple $100 a month. I don't remember the number, but that way he could buy as many video games as he want without telling his wife. Right. And she could go and get a massage and whatever her things were without having to justify it to him. And they came up with a number and they were both happy as could be. Whereas before they were like, I can't believe you bought another game.
Yeah. I mean, as a small business owner myself, a solopreneur, I have my business account and then I pay myself. I go ahead and have my owner's compensation pulled out. And so I kind of feel like that's the money I can do with what I want, whatever, But our kids, our boys will make comments because I did not work full-time prior to starting my own business. I was part-time while the kids were younger. And I consider working for myself full-time. I might not work every day or whatever. But my youngest, bless his heart, because he's a sweet kid and he's a very bright individual, but he'll make the comment like, oh, did you spend dad's money today? Because, we've had these money conversations and they know that my husband, yes, he is the one that brings home more money into the family and he's contributed financially more. But he'll make those comments every now and again. And my husband and I both are like, no, dude, that is not how this works. And I know on some level he's just doing it to be snarky because he's just that kind of kid. But it's a valuable point, too, within a relationship. And I'm not sure if you've come across that, of that defensive, well, this is really my money, and that's why we only spend it this way. Do you ever, with women, as you're talking to them, have to help them rethink that kind of mindset?
So, I mean, about half my clients are women on their own, divorced, widowed, never married. And half the clients are coupled in some way. But we have a new couple who came on board, and we just had the first couple meetings where we're asking all the kind of softer questions, the values and the priorities and how is money handled. And it came out that the woman had, the wife in this case, male-female couple, she had been at a super stressful job, like about to have panic attacks, terrible, toxic boss, really bad. And the husband had said, you need to leave this. This is not good for your long-term health. But she was making a lot of good money. And she went to work at a job that, it doesn't always work this way, but it paid quite a bit less. Right. And it finally came out after 3 hours of conversation that she has guilt about that she's not providing as much to the household as she could have. And these folks, they're pretty much fine. They're in good shape. And yet there's that guilt.
I have that
there.
guilt. I can commiserate with her to a degree. On some level, I have that guilt because I want to contribute more so that we can maybe do some other things that we haven't been able to do. I mean, our kids are getting older and we're now at a better place to a degree that, although once my younger son gets done college, we'll be given college is not cheap. And he chose to go to college and not necessarily an inexpensive one, although I don't think any are inexpensive. So there is some guilt on that I could be doing more to bring in extra money. And again, I guess it's that shame. I mean, do you find that the majority of your clients, it takes more than, let's say, one session or one conversation to help them through this? It's an ongoing process? Or do you feel that once they get it, it's like, okay, they're good?
No. And maybe because I'm not a therapist, right? Like I don't have a magic wand. But no, it's an ongoing conversation and it's an ongoing, them feeling comfortable revealing the feelings that they're having and what's standing in their way. And sometimes it's literally just the reassurance. One woman, when I first met with her, we met this was in the before times when we actually would meet in person, at the cafe at a Whole Foods. And she dissolved into tears. She just melted down. She was so stressed about money. And 2 years later, she was having a little hiccup and she was stressed about something. I was like, Gail, think back to 24 months ago when we met at the Whole Foods. Do you remember? She's like, oh yeah. Sometimes it's reminding them of the progress that they've made.
And I think the point that it goes back to of having the conversations, it's to have these open, honest money conversations. I mean, I have a couple of girlfriends that when we're traveling or we're going somewhere, and they'll ask me questions. They'll ask a tax question or an accounting question. But then we go into talking about our money and trying not to be shamed into, well, this is how much I make and this is what I do with it. And I was just recently having a conversation with a really good friend about our house value. And of course, Zillow has it valued higher than I really think it's worth. But part of me is like, okay, if we sell the house and move, okay, not bad. But having that conversation with her, and she's a single woman, and she has an adopted daughter, and she just having that conversation of that idea of selling a house and the money and what I could do with that money, but then saying to her, yeah, it's a nice little chunk of change, but right now, where would I go with that? Where would I be able to rent because I still have the kids at home if I decided to do that now? And not being ashamed to say, this is how much my house is worth, this is what I think we'll get off of it, and this is where I think I'm going to go with it. And she was kind of like, oh my God, that's awesome, but not shaming me either, or also not making her feel guilty that she's not in that situation. I think that's important too.
Yeah, it's a fine line. It's really hard, which is why when I talk about the money buddy, you got to be careful of whom you're picking. It might not be your significant other. It might not be your best friend, the person you talk to the most often. It might be someone else who kind of has this particular point of view that we don't have to feel shame about money.
Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting thing in having the conversation. That's why I'm doing this. That's why we're having this conversation, because we have to talk about it. We have to know that we are smart when it comes to our money. I mean, I know you say that there are things that stand in the way of making women feel smart about their money. What are some of the things you've come across that you find women perceive to make them not smart when it comes to talking about their money?
A lot of women feel like they have to become an expert to make a decision. Oh, I can't invest until I learn a heck of a lot about investing. When in reality, I think we mentioned the target date retirement funds. You can buy an index fund and do a good job. You don't have to become an expert. But I think because we were never taught, we feel like, oh, shoot, I know nothing. I got to go read 10 books or take a course, and then I'll know enough what to do. So I definitely try to push back on that. That's where I go kind of the questions, ask the questions all right, what is this money for? Money is what I want for 20 years from now when I'm older. Okay, now that I know that, what do you do with 20-year money? And ask some people. You can get more specific with your questions, and then that can help you find better answers.
And I think it's important to find, like you said, either a money buddy or talk to a financial planner, because women are going to say, well, I don't know the questions. Okay, but where you might want to have your money go and do you want to have retirement money? So you could ask the question of, I want to be able to retire. Okay, let's start there. So if you want to be able to retire, what are the things you're doing now to save money? I'm a big proponent, and I always am, the rule of thumb, I think they say, is try to save 3 to 6 months for emergency savings or other goals. And people say, what, I just don't have extra cash. I say, do you have $1? Start the habit, put the dollar away.
Right.
Build the confidence to do that. And then when you have a nice little chunk of change or nest egg, then you can say, okay, where do I want this to go? Do I want it to go and put some away in emergency fund? Because we should always try to have something. But then where can I put the rest of it? Can I invest it? Can I put it in retirement? Can I put it away in a CD and grow a little money and then pull it out when it matures and use it for something else? The conversation has been fabulous. I really love being able to have this conversation where we can just talk and help women hopefully feel less shame when it comes to the money, more financially empowered. Is there anything else that you, Stephanie, would love to share with my listeners?
I would just say, like, back to the theme, right? Give yourself a little grace wherever you are. What is the one thing that's been kind of bothering you, like causing you a little stress that maybe you're trying to push it back? Like maybe it's that long lost 401k from that first job you had 20 years ago. Maybe it's you're really not sure how the spouse is investing things. What is the one thing? And then what's the one step you can take to get a little momentum that, oh, I guess I could try to reach out to that old employer, or maybe I could start in my little journal or something, thinking about the questions I could ask my spouse that would be a gentle way to do this. Or I could go listen to a podcast with Barry Tesler and see what he recommends about money days, something like that, like a baby step. What's a baby step? Because sometimes we avoid things because we don't have the motivation, but momentum leads to motivation. Like if you can take some steps and you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. That felt good. What's the next one, right? What's the next little thing you can do?
And it's okay to ask professionals and experts along that journey too, not just your friends or your money buddy, but it is okay to every now and again check in with that expert who might have a little more insight to help guide you.
Yep. And be sure you know how that expert might charge you for that. Like I'll talk to anyone free for 20 minutes and I'm not always selling them something. I'm like, oh, you know what you really need to do is these 3 things and then come back in a couple years and then maybe we can work together. But reach out for some reliable advice.
Absolutely. So this has been great, Stephanie. Where can we find you?
So my podcast is called Take Back Retirement.
Oh, I love it.
Because when I was in college, we had those Take Back the Night marches and it was empowerment of women. So that was what I was going for. Yeah.
Yeah. So your podcast, give us a little description about your podcast.
Yeah. So I have a co-host, Kevin, and he's a little bit geeky and investment focused. And I'm a little bit smooshy and, the softer side of things, kind of like the Donnie and Marie.
Okay.
A little bit country, a little bit rock and roll.
Yep.
And we really are trying to speak to women at midlife and better about whatever quote unquote retirement means to them. Take back retirement is let's redefine it. Let's really kind of make it into something that's meaningful for us. Very few of the women I talk to want to just retire from life and sit around knitting. They want to stay engaged in it, fulfilled and maybe just not do their current thing anymore. So that's what we talk about. All the different facets.
I love it. And I'll make sure there's a link to the podcast in the bio of this episode. And can we find you elsewhere on social media if anybody would like to reach out and ask further questions?
Sure. My company is Sophia Financial. That's Sophia with an F.
Okay.
So I'm at Sophia Financial on all the different places.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us on Your Financial Maven.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, it's Your Financial Maven, and I want to hear from you. Feel free to leave me your insights and money stories or questions that you may have about money. You can visit www.yourfinancialmavenpodcast.com and click on the I Want to Hear From You tab. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about money. The purpose of this podcast is to provide general information on the subjects discussed. It is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. You should consult your CPA, accountant, or tax professional for all of your specific financial needs or situations. Your Financial Maven is hosted and produced by Samantha M. Besnoff, CPA, and Your Financial Maven, LLC. Editing is done by Chris Zarnock of KM Zen Creative. Music is written, composed, and performed by Daniel Shore.